TikTok offered instant fame, millions of eyes, fleeting validation, and the illusion of immortality. But for some creators, that chase for recognition ended in tragedy. In this video, we're uncovering 6 of the most shocking deaths born from the pursuit of viral fame. It was March 14th, 2021, in Bangkok, Thailand. Along one of the city's main arterial roads, movement never stopped. Engines idling, scooters weaving between lanes, and traffic lights flashing through smog. By dusk, a single live broadcast would turn the familiar chaos of the street into the setting for something tragic. Suda Kongsri was 25, born and raised in the Thonburi district. She worked sporadically in retail, but had spent the past year building a following online for her short stunt clips. Her friends described her as impulsive but determined, someone who believed consistency didn't matter as much as spectacle. She filmed with a mid-range smartphone, using public spaces as her backdrop. Her posts drew modest attention until she started performing riskier challenges, often involving traffic, rooftops, or trains. The engagement made her restless. She measured success by real-time viewer counts. Sponsors never came officially, but local snack and fashion brands occasionally sent her small boxes of products, expecting tags in return. Her videos were raw and unedited, shot handheld in Bangkok's congested streets. The appeal for her audience was unpredictability. For Suda, it was validation. On social media, she hinted that she wanted to hit 100,000 followers by the end of 2021. Privately, she told friends she wanted to be noticed by brands that matter. The more reckless her content became, the closer she felt to that goal. On the evening of March 14th, she started a live stream near an elevated pedestrian walkway above Ratchadaphisek Road, but stayed on ground level. The road was wide, 6 lanes in total, divided by a narrow raised concrete median. At around 6:30 p.m., the sky dimmed and rush hour thickened. She announced her next stunt, a cross-the-highway challenge, inspired by a similar viral clip trending from another country. Her viewers egged her on in the comments, some calling it fake, others daring her to prove it was real. Despite honking traffic and the warning of a friend off camera, she adjusted her phone, set it facing the lanes, and prepared to run. The lights ahead had just turned green, releasing a dense stream of cars, motorcycles, and buses. Suda waited for what seemed like a gap, then sprinted across the first 3 lanes. She waved toward the camera, smiling mid-run. Witnesses later said she looked confident, even rehearsed. But as she reached the narrow median, her foot caught the chipped edge of the curb. The stumble wasn't dramatic. It was quick, almost invisible in the footage. Yet it threw her off balance enough to send her forward into the oncoming side. The first impact came from a yellow taxi moving at around 45 miles per hour. Its front bumper hit her left side, folding her over the hood before she rolled off onto the asphalt. A white sedan behind the taxi swerved too late, clipping her legs as she landed. Eyewitnesses described a sudden silence after the collision, followed by several drivers pulling over. Traffic cameras confirmed that the incident unfolded in under 8 seconds. Rescuers arrived within minutes after being notified by motorists. Paramedics assessed her on site, but her pulse was absent. She had sustained massive blunt force trauma to her torso and pelvis. Police cordoned off 2 lanes, diverting traffic around the scene as commuters slowed to stare from their cars. The investigation concluded within 48 hours. Officials cited self-endangerment during digital content creation as the cause. Dashcam and CCTV footage supported the sequence exactly as seen online. There was no indication of foul play or driver negligence. For a few days, the spot drew small gatherings, candles, flowers, and people taking photos beside the median. Within a week, those traces disappeared, washed away by rain and traffic. It was July 7th, 2019, deep in the Everglades, Florida. A small boat moved along a flooded trail lined with sawgrass and cypress roots, carrying 2 young men with a camera bag and a goal. They had launched from a small access near the C-111 canal, about 20 miles southwest of Homestead. By mid-afternoon, this filming trip would turn into a failed rescue call, replayed by investigators frame by frame. Tyler Jenkins was 22, a part-time landscaper from Homestead. He ran a small TikTok account where he filmed himself catching or showing wild reptiles. His videos drew modest traffic, sometimes a few thousand views. but enough to convince him it could grow. He admired wildlife handlers and online survival personalities, copying their presentation style but without their training or safety gear. His family described him as restless and easily thrilled, someone who wanted to prove he wasn't afraid of Florida's wildlife. He'd handled non-venomous snakes dozens of times, posting clips with titles about bravery and respecting nature. None of those stunts had gone wrong before. The Everglades that season were at peak flood. The water level was high, which meant snakes moved closer to the levees and narrow dry banks. Cottonmouths, water moccasins, were common. They blended with fallen branches, resting motionless until disturbed. Tyler and his cameraman, a friend named Eric, used a small John boat to reach deeper into the swamp, armed only with a camera, a long-handled fishing net, and rubber boots. He'd mentioned in a message earlier that morning that he wanted something riskier to post before summer ended, complaining his latest uploads were too tame. That afternoon, around 3:40 p.m., the pair stopped along a shallow edge near mangroves, where they noticed a dark snake coiled near a root cluster. Tyler pointed it out, telling Eric to start filming. The snake's triangular head and thick body were obvious signs of venom, but Tyler dismissed it as an easy one. Eric hesitated, suggesting they skip it and move on, but Tyler crouched closer with the camera still rolling. He reached down with his right hand, trying to grab the snake just behind its head. The strike came instantly. The cottonmouth lunged upward, its mouth flashing white, and its fangs sank into his wrist. Eric's footage later confirmed a single, deep puncture with immediate bleeding. Tyler jerked back, shouting. The snake fell into the water and disappeared. He pressed his hand against his shirt, visibly panicking. Within minutes, swelling began to rise from his wrist to his forearm. Eric mentioned his breathing quickening, his voice fading as he tried to stay upright. Eric used his phone to call emergency services, relaying their GPS coordinates. Dispatchers advised him to keep Tyler calm and still, but the symptoms advanced fast: nausea, vomiting, and confusion. At 4:05 p.m., roughly 25 minutes after the bite, Tyler's blood pressure began to collapse. His face turned pale, his speech slurred. Eric attempted to row the boat back toward the road access, but dense vegetation slowed progress. Rescue crews reached them at 4:38 p.m., using an airboat guided by a ranger familiar with the area. Tyler was unresponsive, with shallow breathing and extensive swelling up to his shoulder. Paramedics noted severe hypotension and respiratory distress, consistent with systemic envenomation. They initiated advanced life support, administering oxygen and cardiac compressions en route to the landing site. But he showed no recovery. At 5:12 p.m., he was pronounced dead upon arrival at the Homestead Hospital. The State Wildlife Commission reviewed the video and confirmed the snake was a Florida cottonmouth, an adult roughly 2.5 feet long. Toxicology results were consistent with envenomation causing rapid circulatory collapse. In the weeks that followed, Eric withdrew from social media entirely. Investigators described him as cooperative, but visibly shaken, replaying the video multiple times during questioning. He later told reporters he couldn't return to the swamp again. Friends said he stopped filming wildlife altogether. It was February 12th, 2020, on the frozen expanse of Lake Winnebago, Wisconsin. A small group of friends had gathered near the South Shore, where snowmobile tracks etched uneven lines into the ice. What started as a lighthearted recording for TikTok would soon turn into a silent disaster unfolding beneath the frozen lake. Hannah Larson was 19, a first-year student at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. She ran a modest TikTok account where she filmed winter activities, lake plunges, ice skating, and harmless snow stunts. Her followers were small in number, but enthusiastic. Friends described her as confident and attention-driven. She had grown up near the lake and often claimed she knew the ice, believing local familiarity kept her safe. Lake Winnebago's ice that winter was inconsistent. Temperatures had fluctuated for days, creating areas of soft slush and uneven thickness. Locals knew that sections along the southern shore where currents flowed rarely froze solid. Despite repeated warnings from local authorities about weak ice, Hannah and a classmate decided to film a skating clip for her next post. She brought a pair of figure skates, her phone mounted to a tripod, and a lightweight rope she claimed was just in case. Her friend carried a small camera to capture side angles for editing. Neither wore flotation aids or ice picks, standard safety gear for lake activity. By early afternoon, they had chosen a section of ice a few hundred feet from shore. The cold wind moved across the lake, scattering powdery snow and revealing dark patches beneath. Nearby, anglers had avoided the area entirely. Hannah dismissed the visible cracks, stepping onto the surface and testing it with one foot before gliding forward. She laughed to the camera, narrating how the ice sang, referring to the echoing pops beneath her skates. Her friend filmed from a safe distance, repeatedly warning that the surface looked unstable. Hannah continued further, spinning once, then crouching for a shot closer to the tripod. At 2:14 p.m., the camera captured the first sharp crack. The sound echoed across the frozen surface. The ice under her right skate fractured in a jagged circle, then dropped. She screamed as she plunged waist-deep before the panel fully gave way. The water was near freezing, an estimated 33 degrees Fahrenheit. Her immediate reaction showed the cold shock response. A violent gasp, arms thrashing for balance, breath rapidly lost. The hole widened as she struggled, breaking apart more of the thin ice edge. Her friend rushed forward, throwing the rope, but it landed just short. When he tried to crawl closer, the ice under him creaked and collapsed in pieces, forcing him to retreat. Hannah managed to grab the edge once, but couldn't lift herself. The wet sleeves froze stiff against her skin. Within 90 seconds, she lost strength, her movements slowing. Emergency calls were made by her friend at 2:17 p.m. Local responders arrived within 15 minutes with a hovercraft unit and ice rescue divers. They located the opening and marked it with poles before descending. At 2:44 p.m., divers recovered Hannah's body approximately 10 feet from the entry hole, under a thin ice layer that had begun to refreeze. She showed no vital signs upon extraction and was declared deceased on scene. The Winnebago County Coroner's report listed cold water immersion leading to drowning as the cause of death. Analysis of the footage aligned with known cold water physiology, loss of breath control, rapid incapacitation, and submersion within 3 minutes. In the following days, the lake grew strangely quiet. Locals stopped skating near the south shore. The hole refroze, but the surrounding snow remained marked by poles and footprints for weeks. No formal statements followed. Just a caution passed quietly through the campus and among fishermen who'd seen the rescue lights that afternoon. It was September 18, 2020, in Pune, India. Inside a second-floor apartment, a 21-year-old man prepared his latest science experiment video, something meant to look impressive and improvised. The setup was clumsy but deliberate. A plastic table, scattered bottles, a phone balanced on a stand, unfitting for what would happen next. Ravi Sharma had built a modest online following through short DIY and science hack TikTok videos. A dropout from a local engineering diploma course, he spent his days experimenting with homemade devices, baking soda rockets, small smoke bombs, and chemical reactions copied from online tutorials. His small audience rewarded spectacle. Every video that involved fire or loud noise got more views. Ravi had no real training in chemistry, but learned terminology from forums and clips that simplified dangerous procedures. He lived with his parents and younger sister in a 2-bedroom flat in a dense residential neighborhood of Dapodi. His workshop was the balcony-turned storage room where he filmed most of his content. Over time, he collected materials sold in hardware and hobby stores, oxidizers, propellants, and adhesives. To make his videos more dramatic, he often modified designs to exaggerate results. The day before the incident, he told his sister he wanted to make a mini rocket engine using compressed powder fuel inspired by an overseas YouTuber. Unlike commercial kits, his setup lacked venting or structural reinforcement. That Friday afternoon, the plan was to test the homemade rocket indoors to see how strong the thrust would be. His mother was cooking lunch while Ravi arranged a small aluminum canister on his desk. The propellant mixture, potassium nitrate granules blended with sugar and binder, was tightly packed into the canister and sealed with epoxy. He aimed to ignite it with a wire connected to an adapter, recording the moment with his phone. The device was effectively a sealed pressure vessel, something that, if ignited, could not vent gas safely. Several neighbors later reported hearing him talking excitedly to his camera. The live stream began just before 2:20 p.m., and showed him explaining the chemical rocket demo. As he touched the wire leads to power, a brief hiss preceded a flash. The reaction was almost instantaneous, a violent deflagration instead of propulsion. The canister ruptured, producing a concussive blast that blew out the room's windows and filled the frame with white light. The camera fell sideways but continued recording audio, crackling flames, shouting, and falling debris. The explosion ignited nearby paper and plastic, triggering a flash fire that spread to the curtains and the wooden shelf. Neighbors in adjacent flats heard the blast and rushed into the corridor, where smoke poured from the window openings. Ravi was later found collapsed near the door, his upper body severely burned, with cuts from metal fragments. Paramedics called by neighbors arrived within 15 minutes, but found no pulse. Fire crews extinguished the blaze within 30 minutes, preventing spread to neighboring units. Forensic investigators determined that the deflagration was caused by overpressure inside the sealed canister, a predictable result of confinement without venting. The Pune Fire Department reported that the blast shattered glass in 2 adjacent apartments, slightly injuring 1 resident. Investigators ruled the case accidental, citing reckless handling of volatile materials. Local housing authorities ordered minor structural repairs, and neighbors recalled the smell of burnt plastic lingering for weeks. Ravi's family cremated him 2 days later in a small ceremony. It was November 6, 2021, in Shanghai, China. It was evening in Nanjing Road, with crowds gathered for the annual Autumn Night Market Festival. Alongside tens of thousands of others, one young woman pushed toward the center where performers stood elevated above the crowd. Li Mei was 24, a retail worker at a clothing store in the Jing'an district. She supplemented her income through live streaming and TikTok clips, street food reviews, nightlife walks, and festival coverage. Her goal was to build an audience large enough to attract brand sponsorships. Colleagues said she was soft-spoken off camera but driven online, often going out alone after work to record. She used a stabilizer-mounted phone and a small LED light, tools she considered essential to stand out in a saturated local content scene. By early November, Shanghai's downtown events had drawn record numbers following months of relaxed restrictions. The festival that night featured food stalls, music, and pop-up exhibitions. With crowd density peaking near the central intersection, police barriers were present, but pedestrian flow overwhelmed available space. Event organizers had encouraged live streamers to share the energy, indirectly pushing creators like Lee to get closer to the action. Her footage often depended on proximity, crowd reactions, motion, sound. That pursuit of closeness would put her directly in the path of the surge. Around 8:40 p.m., Lee began streaming from just off a vendor's canopy, narrating as she moved forward through the thick crowd. Witnesses later said she appeared focused on framing her shot rather than her footing. The crowd was tightly packed, people shoulder to shoulder, movement limited to inches. Some tried to retreat, but couldn't. When a performer threw promotional items into the air, hundreds surged forward simultaneously. Pressure waves rippled through the mass of bodies. Those who survived recalled a sudden collapse of order. The front rows pushed against the barriers, which flexed but didn't break. Lee's stream captured shaking footage of the rush, screams blending with muffled audio before the camera angle dropped. In the confusion, she stumbled as the surge knocked her sideways. People behind her continued moving, unaware she had fallen. Within seconds, she was pinned beneath multiple individuals, her body compressed by hundreds of pounds of weight from above. Eyewitnesses described an immediate inability to breathe among those in the densest section. Several fainted upright. The few who tried to help were themselves immobilized by the pressure. Security personnel forced open a small channel minutes later, pulling limp bodies from the front. When rescuers reached Lee, she showed no movement. On-scene medical responders performed chest compressions, but there were no spontaneous breaths. They transported her to a nearby hospital within 10 minutes, where she was declared dead on arrival. The cause was compressive asphyxia, prolonged chest wall restriction, preventing effective breathing. Other victims from adjacent sections suffered fractures, bruising, and fainting episodes, but survived. City officials issued a statement within 2 days, describing the incident as a sudden crowd compression during the night market. No individuals or organizations were formally blamed, and the investigation concluded without charges. The following weekend, the festival reopened under stricter crowd limits. Lee's family collected her remains in private, declining all interview requests. It was March 15, 2020, in Los Angeles, California. The city was under the subdued unease of the early pandemic, but online audiences were restless. Inside a cluttered one-bedroom apartment in Glendale, a small ring light cast a harsh glow on an exhausted face. By the end of that night, the broadcast that began as another endurance challenge would end as a medical emergency caught live. Ethan Morales was 20 years old, a community college student studying digital media. He had gained modest online traction for his self-filmed endurance stunts. Fasting, sleeplessness, and high caffeine intake, each presented as a test of willpower. His content relied on pushing limits, with sponsorships from small supplement resellers and an energy drink distributor that occasionally sent him free cases to promote. Off-camera, he worked part-time at a tech store and lived with 2 roommates who mostly ignored his filming. He was known for competitiveness and a visible need to prove resilience to his audience, often framing discomfort as discipline. The Stay Awake challenge was familiar territory. Ethan's setup was basic: a laptop, 2 cameras, and constant access to energy drinks. The commercial products he used contained caffeine, taurine, and guarana extracts. In large doses, they could elevate heart rate and blood pressure, especially when paired with lack of sleep. He had read the labels but dismissed warnings, referencing past attempts where he claimed to stay awake for 60 hours without issue. His growing followers encouraged him, sending donations and urging him to push for 72 hours this time. On March 13th, he began streaming on TikTok from his desk, documenting every hour awake. For the first day, he seemed stable, chatting, gaming, pacing his apartment. By the second night, his speech slowed and his posture sagged, his chat filled with both concern and encouragement. The room behind him dimmed as the daylight hours blurred together. Empty cans piled beside his chair, and his skin took on a pale, clammy tone. By the third morning, he had consumed the equivalent of over 2,500 milligrams of caffeine, roughly 15 cans, and several concentrated shots. That afternoon, around the 68th hour, his stream showed brief tremors in his hands as he held another can. Viewers noticed he had trouble keeping his head upright. He slurred words, describing dizziness and warmth in his chest. About 20 minutes later, he suddenly stiffened and fell sideways out of frame. The camera, still recording, caught faint twitching movements and the chair rolling back. Comments flooded the chat, some confused, others alarmed. After 2 minutes with no movement, several viewers traced his location through prior streams and called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, forced entry with the help of the building manager, and found Ethan unresponsive beside the desk. The apartment smelled strongly of artificial fruit and caffeine powder. Resuscitation attempts began immediately and continued en route to Glendale Memorial Hospital. His initial rhythm showed ventricular fibrillation that progressed to cardiac arrest. Despite multiple defibrillations and doses of epinephrine and amiodarone, he never regained a pulse. A later autopsy confirmed a pre-existing, undiagnosed hypertrophic cardiomyopathy that had made him especially vulnerable to stimulant overload. The energy drink distributor quietly ended all informal promotions with online creators the following week. No public statement was released, and their social media accounts avoided any mention of Ethan or endurance content for the rest of the year. Thanks for watching. If these steep rise to fame ending to deadly downfalls entertained you, click here for more.